I'm Debbie Lacey, founder and executive director for Eastside for All, which is a nonprofit racial equity and social justice advocacy organization based here in East King County. Please, as we begin, join me in expressing our deepest respect and gratitude for our Indigenous neighbors, for their enduring care of our shared lands and waterways. You can learn more about them at the Native Land Digital website, which I'll put in the chat in just a moment. I forgot to pull that up for us. But we want to reflect on this space being on the unceded and ancestral land of the Duwamish, Coast Salish, Muckleshoot, Puyallup, Snoqualmie, Stillaguamish, and the Suquamish people. We honor and give thanks to the First Peoples, past, present, and future, and to the land itself. And I always want to say and acknowledge that statements and acknowledgements, just like the one I just gave, are not replacements for authentic relationship building and the practice of centering the needs and contributions of our Indigenous communities. So as I welcome you to this series of events, we are going to have a lot of events coming up hosted by Eastside for All and FutureWise and some of our other amazing partners in the community around advocacy for housing justice. And so you're here at kind of our debut point. We have very excellent speakers lined up for this series, and we encourage you to bring your questions, your concerns, ideas, and solutions. And please do share with your friends, family, coworkers, anyone interested in joining us to make our voices heard so we can all afford to live here, raise families here if we choose, and continue to call East King County our home. So with that, I do want to thank FutureWise, who I mentioned before, an incredible advocacy organization partnering with us, co-creating this series and behind a great deal of advocacy happening at the local level for affordable housing and other issues related to our infrastructure and our quality of life here in East King County. I want to also thank the Washington Build Back Black Alliance for their partnership and co-creation as well. And I want to welcome our newest team member, Guillermo. Guillermo, can you please say hi to everyone and introduce yourself? I'm going to hopefully unmute you.
Yes, you did. Thank you, Debbie. Hi, everyone. My name is Guillermo Rivera, and I'm the new housing justice organizer for the Eastside for All. This is the beginning of my second week, but I'm really, really excited to see you all here. And yeah, welcome everyone.
Well, no one's happier to have Guillermo here than I am. So thank you, Guillermo. All right. Well, again, welcome into this space. If you haven't already had a chance to put your answer to where's home in the chat, we encourage you to do that. So at this time, I want to, I have the great pleasure and honor to introduce today's speaker. Paula Sardinas is currently serving as the president and CEO of FMS Global Strategies, LLC, a Black and other BIPOC governmental affairs lobbying firm, and the Purpose Driven Girl, a 501c3 nonprofit focused on empowering BIPOC women and girls. Her career in public policy spans 30 years. And that's a lie because you just aren't old enough for that. Public policy spans 30 years working in telecom, engineering, banking, IT, STEM, cannabis, social equity, and financial literacy. And on December 1st of 2020, she founded the Washington Build Back Black Alliance, of which Eastside for All is a proud member. Over the past 13 years, Paula has successfully passed legislation regarding affordable healthcare, data privacy, anti-bullying, foreclosure fairness, and expanded access to public deposits banking. She was working hard for all of us in this year's legislative session, which just ended earlier this month. And I'm sure you're still, your blood is still pumping with all of that activity. And thank you so much for all that you did just recently, and not to mention over so many years, Paula. Welcome to East King County Eastside for All event, and thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. It's an honor. Debbie, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I want to thank everybody for taking time on this Thursday evening to spend with us. Your voice matters. Our goal at the Washington Build Back Black Alliance is to help community members center their voice and to help you know that your voice is powerful. Part of what we're going to do in this training tonight is discuss how we're all connected to the East Side and how we can come together as a community and advocate for housing justice and more affordable housing in East King County. We're going to go into breakout rooms in a little bit because I think it's really important for us to have those small, intimate conversations and kind of get to know each other. We want this to be an interactive dialogue where we're talking with each other, not at each other. So I'll give you a little bit of my story. When I first moved here in 2016, my husband worked in Bellevue. I lived in Renton, and today we live in Issaquah. Bellevue has always felt like home to me. We love the East Side. We do our business there, we work there. Our children graduated in that school district. So as I look at my kids who are graduating college, one next year and one's a freshman at UW, it's imperative to me that we have affordable housing so that they can remain in the community. And so at this point, we're going to send you to the breakout room so you can share your story and we can hear about what the East Side means to you and why you all came to this meeting tonight. Debbie?
Thank you, Paula. And yes, we have a question for you, and we do want to get you in small groups. And if you've been to Eastside for All events before, you know that we are about relationship building first and foremost. And we know that our power depends on us to be able to know each other, to greet each other in spaces like this, and to work together. And so we do want to take some time today to send you off into spaces where you can connect with one another briefly. And so this is just an open question. What connects you to the East Side and makes you want to stay here?
And so we had some really powerful small group conversations. And I think what I'd like to do to get us started is just to have a spokesperson from each one of our groups just kind of report back on what you talked about in your group in kind of 1 or 2 minutes in a synopsis before we get into the presentation. I'd love to start with our group. We were in breakout room number 2. And Janice, not to put you on the spot, but you were powerful. Would you like to report back on what we discussed in our group? Introduce yourself and report back.
Oh, we need to unmute, folks. Hold on. We've got people on mute. So who are you turning that over to, Paula?
Janice from.
Oh, was it Janice Zahn?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So we talked a bit about affordable housing, and I shared that back in 2017, when we adopted the Affordable Housing Strategic Plan, our goal was 2,500 units in 10 years. And if we're only building 250 units a year, there is no way we will meet the needs of our community. I also shared that in 2019, 20% of households make less than $50,000 a year. So where can they actually live in Bellevue for that much money? And that until we update our numbers to be very realistic and just brutally honest with ourselves about just the amount of shortfall that we have, we are not going to have the tough conversations in our community that we have to have about how we create the kind of housing that's affordable in addition to more housing in general. So I believe that we are having those conversations now, but that means that for the X number of years prior to that, we were moving at way too slow of a pace, and now we're going to have to accelerate even more. And the challenge is going to be that those that have been in the community a long time are going to struggle with the kind of change that's going to be needed in order to build the level and scale of housing we need. And yet, this is the time because we can't wait. So that was what I was sharing with the group.
And you're getting, I love seeing everybody on gallery because you're getting a round of applause. That's what we want to hear. We want this to be a dialogue where we are uplifting your voice, and we're going to go out of order. So raise your hand if you were in group 4, if you appointed a spokesperson from group 4 who wants to report back on what your group covered. Where's my group 4? There you go, Maria. That's right. She's been volunteered, so she doesn't have to be voluntold. Maria, come off mute and give us a report. Brady, we might need a little help getting Maria off mute.
All right, I am on it.
There you go, Maria.
There we go. Yeah, I think we were room 4. That's so funny what you talked about, Janice, because that's kind of similar to what we talked about. I shared that my home is my home because this was where my parents were lucky enough to find a home that was affordable and closer to my dad's work back in the 90s. They found a house in Issaquah before prices, shot up. And I've also been very lucky to be able to find places that we can afford. And it was similar for other people in our group. This was where they were able to find a place to live, and that's also where the job was. And for someone else in the group, this was a place that was safe from where they were coming from. It was a place of opportunity where they could actually go to school and live the best possible life that their parents wanted.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Maria, for sharing. That was very powerful. Group number 1. Who is in group number 1 and who'd like to report back on behalf of group number 1? Brady knows who you are. Don't be shy. You'll get voluntold. You're in good company here. Nothing you can say is wrong. Group 1? I don't remember what group I was in. Okay, Han, well, Han, go ahead and report back, So whatever group Han was in, Han, she said, I don't remember what group now she's like, now I'm getting voluntold. Han, give us a report from your group. Brady, let's unmute her. Oh, and Maria's, there we go, Maria.
That's what you get for speaking up, but that's okay. I'm used to it. So our group had, she called herself a spy. She's actually from Anacortes, but we had a good conversation anyway. Very similar themes of along the lines of, our families in the area, and we want to stay near our family, which obviously fits the theme of affordable housing, because how can our children stay near us if they can't afford the rent, if they can't afford or find a place to stay? So all very similar themes. And something that stuck out to me is that 2 of us in that group are immigrants, and immigrants have another barrier to overcome when it comes to affordable housing. And some of it has to deal with language barriers and accessibility in that sense. So when we think about affordable housing, we also need to think about how we make it accessible to all sorts of groups of people, whether it be people who are handy capable, people who have English as a second language.
Very powerful. Thank you for sharing. If you remember that you were in group 3 or anyone from group 3 would like to come forward and to share. Marina, I think you're going to get volunteered because I think I saw your hand earlier. Or someone else wants to come forward and to share.
I was in Han's group actually, so.
See, you're getting off the hook there. So we've already had that group. So you other folks know the group you were in. Someone come forward. Just anything you want to share. Anything you want to share about your conversation or your lived experience with the East Side. Claire, I see it on your face. I feel it. I feel like you've got, Claire's like, oh God, no. I feel it, Claire. I feel it. Nobody from the last group? Anybody else? Okay, Karina, please. Brady, if we could unmute Karina to share. There we go.
Hey, I was actually in group 1. And the 4 of us, we had all lived someplace far away as well. One of us was a native, but had moved away and then come back. The rest of us were from far away. And we talked about how you have to pay to feel safe. Like there's places that are cheaper, but then you sacrifice either your commute or your feeling of safety, and how unfair that is that, you know, to get a feeling of safety, you have to pay more. And that's something that we should all have.
You should feel safe no matter where you live, but that's very powerful, especially with the public safety crisis. And I see that Chris Randall has raised his hand. If we could unmute Chris and have Chris speak, and then we'll move forward. Chris?
There we go. Yeah, hi. I was in group 3. Oh, no, I meant to lower. There we go. I was in group 3. I kind of came in the middle, so there might have been some things that I missed. But I think an overarching theme that I heard, at least from a few of us, was community, and how a lot of the draw, or a lot of the reason why a lot of us would like to be able to stay in this area, are the connections and the community that we've all built together with our neighbors, with various groups that we're involved in, from advocacy angles to other angles as well. And sharing my personal experience of how I moved here from across the country, and my personal experiences of building community here, and wanting to be able to stay here. Very similar to, I would think our group also talked about families and making sure that children are able to afford to still live here. And that definitely applies to me in the sense of, I would like to be able to have the ability to invest in and build wealth in my community, through ownership and through having housing types that work for me and my friends and my family. So yeah, that's what draws a lot of us to this work.
And that's wonderful. And so we'll get into a little bit of the training and start to really understand centering your voice in some of these descriptions. And Debbie will share the PowerPoint so that you can see it as we go through it. But as I listened to your feedback, some of the things that stood out to me were affordability, safety, community, and family. These are the historical context that we're going to talk about, and why it's so important that we maintain ongoing and affordable housing. Next slide. So how do we get here? Let's look at our history. Let's talk about discrimination in the U.S. housing and zoning policies and lending. Imagine the 20th century, where Black Americans were specifically and intentionally and systematically excluded from opportunities to own housing. As a former banker, I can tell you, and I was explaining that earlier, that they would take maps, much like the map you're seeing on your screen, and they would take a red marker and they would outline certain areas, and that's where we get that term redlining from. And they would say, you can only purchase a property if you are a Black person or a person of color in these specific areas. Often there were areas with distressed property, and we saw this happening over and over in some of our larger urban cities. You know, we know it happened in Seattle for many, many years, Baltimore, Atlanta, Jacksonville, Florida, where I'm from, until the courts had to intervene. And then you couple that with the unfair lending practices, where even if you could afford a home in a good community, there were laws and ordinances passed at the local level, some of which live today, which determined where you and your family were able to live. That means that Black people were relegated to what we would call Black neighborhoods. And in Seattle, we remember that as the Central District. And white families were relegated to areas where the property values were higher and they had better neighborhoods. They weren't subjected to predatory lending, high interest rates, and some of the other unfair practices that we saw in our communities of color. And so, next slide, we'll talk a little bit about urban renewal, which happens in the 60s. That's when you're getting all of these new highways, and you are building communities, and you're building families, and you're building low-income communities, and you're building affordable housing. And then you start to go in and you start to do these fair housing laws to make sure that people that look like me, that look like Christina and some of the other folks on this call tonight, were able to have that same fair and equal opportunity as others, and they wouldn't be displaced. And this happened at the height of the civil rights movement. So imagine we're fighting for voting rights. We're also fighting for fair housing rights. We're fighting to end things like segregation. And we think that it was only happening in the southern part of the United States. It was very prevalent here in Seattle. Next slide. So how does that impact us today? There's geographic segregation, racial and wealth inequities, inequitable access to jobs, inequitable levels of public investment, and health outcomes. So let's break that down so that we can understand that. Geographic segregation. We put you in a certain area and tell you this is the only place that you can live. It is normally in an area that is highly industrial, so you're going to have the worst air qualities and you're going to suffer other healthcare impacts of that. The racial wealth gap, we know that for Black and BIPOC Americans, we are trending about 40 years behind in the wealth gap. Wages have been stagnant. And equitable access to jobs and schools. Someone shared from their group, you move because you want to live in a community that's safe. Most of us also know that those are the areas that have the best schools, that have the best resources, that provide the best amenities for those families, and equitable levels of public investment. What happens to a community year after year when there's been no public investment in infrastructure? We're not improving the roads, we're not improving the streets, we're not maintaining some of the public housing. It's disintegrating. Inequitable health outcomes. When we look at our air quality and we look along I-90 and I-5, there's an intersectionality there with structural racism and systemic poverty. People with the lowest socioeconomic level and income also have the highest rates of respiratory disease and cancer and asthma. There's an intersectionality here with a proportionality of housing discrimination. Next slide. So how does our land use and our housing and our growth factor into that? Next slide. Well, let's talk about it. 1.5 million people in King County, so we're rapidly growing. 2.26 million people in a 30-year period. We're facing a housing shortage of about 227,000 units, and about 30% of those units are on the east side. You heard Janice speak a little bit about that. We are not keeping up with the population growth. Our population is growing, jobs are growing, demand is growing, but we have failed in Washington State as a state to build the number of housing units we need, affordable and otherwise, the inventory, so that people are able to rent and so that they're able to buy. Next slide. So imagine being told you are literally being priced out of the American dream. As we create these additional rail stops, and I'm one of those people that I've always supported high-speed rail, I want people to be able to get to those good paying jobs. So we're making massive investments in transit. $16 billion budget this year signed. But we know we don't have enough affordable housing near these transit locations. So we're overwhelming the east side, we're overwhelming these cities with populace, yet we're not making the investment in the housing. Think about mental and physical health if you're spending 4 and 5 hours a day, even on light rail commuting, because you can't afford to live where you work. Amazon is planning to add alone 25,000 jobs because they're moving out of Seattle. 6.6 million square foot building. You've got Facebook, TikTok, and Google, which are high-tech jobs bringing good incomes. But for most of the people on this call, those incomes are not going to hit you. If you do not work in the tech sector, their investment into your community is going to make housing even more unaffordable. Next slide. So what does that look like when we talk about the job growth and the economic impact? On one hand, we're super excited, like we were saying, we're like, hey, they're coming, they're bringing jobs. That was my thought when I first moved here. As I told you, my connection to the East Side was that my husband got a job when we moved here in 2016, and he was working in Bellevue. We started to look for a house in Bellevue compared to what we were paying in Jacksonville, Florida, and St. Augustine, Florida. It was a $900,000 price differential. Imagine relocating to a state, bringing your husband, bringing your children, and they have to go to school, and your cost in housing increases 900%. We knew that we were not going to be able to live and work in Bellevue. We were going to become a commuter family. That meant making arrangements for our children, somebody to pick up the small kids from school, making sure that one of us had flexibility so that we could get off and not be caught in that I-405 traffic. It changes your lifestyle. Next slide. So what are we doing about it? Funding hasn't kept up with it. We talk about preserving affordable housing at low income levels, but let's talk about what does that really mean? We all saw a couple weeks ago a house in Bellevue sold for $1 million over asking price. The market is inflated. So the first thing that we have to do when we talk about advocacy and using our voices, we've got to start defining what is affordable housing. Is it $1 million or $2 million? Like Janice said, when you're making $50,000 a year, is that affordable? What really is affordable housing? Next slide. So housing growth has not matched population growth, which has also not matched incomes, because most people are spending 30% or more, which is their cost burden of their income. And if you are spending that number that Janice quoted, then you are severely cost burdened. That means after taxes, your take home, 30% of that, if you're lucky to be cost burdened, is going towards housing. But if you're like most folks in community, you're at 50 to 60%. Next slide. So what does this mean? It means that most people who grew up on the East Side, who love the East Side, who work, live, and play there, and their parents created a home with family, safety, and community and connections, will not be able to pass that on to their children if we don't do something and do something now. Next slide. Cost burden adds to the risk of displacement for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We are trending when it comes to unhoused and homelessness. When you see those tents along I-405, when you see them along I-90, that's the high cost of unaffordable housing. Next slide. And so it's an equity crisis. We have the longest eviction moratorium in the history of the United States here in Washington State because rents are going up. Not 3%, not 5%, not 10%. The highest rental increase reported to me was 960%. And despite those narratives, it is affecting people with vulnerabilities, poverty, and mental illness because they need champions to advocate for them. We need to make sure when we're talking about affordable housing, we're not just looking at AMI, we're not just looking at folks that have a Section 8 voucher, that we are being diverse and inclusive of all voices and everyone who needs and wants a home. Next slide. So we're going to go into our next small group discussions, and we're going to talk about, based on the information we've shared, what are some of the concerns that you heard? And someone asked me that. Yes, 960% was a rental increase amount that was factual. And this is so wonderful. And this is not planned or staged. We reported that to Senator Patty Kutter, who serves the 48th district. And we had a really great bill this session that felt like rent control that did not pass based on that person's lived experience. And so we'll go into our small group discussions for group 2, where we'll have some more communication about your concerns, and then we'll come back and we'll talk some more. Does that sound good to everybody? Awesome. Brady, send us to our small groups and we'll be back.
see. So the question that we were answering was what concerns us in terms of the future of the East Side and now of the East Side. I think it's mostly, we were talking about housing density and making sure that we message things correctly for our communities to understand what affordable housing means. And then not scaring the people that have been there for a while who don't want certain types of change, like we were just discussing. And then we, Claire and myself are both from the same city, Bothell, and we're very fortunate. Claire is a planning commissioner. Sorry, I'm outing you. And so she's got a lot of insight into how we're setting Bothell up for success in terms of making sure that we're making more walkable spaces. We're getting rid of, parking limitations for the developers. We're looking at, what else was it? Housing near transit. Our planning commission and our city leadership is aligned on this stuff. So that's not the concern. The concern is making sure that the community members are going along with it and understand why we're doing all these things.
Thank you so much from Group 3. Thank you, Hon, so much. That was wonderful. Anybody from Group 3, Claire, anybody else want to add anything? We want everybody to feel like their voice is powerful. Is there anything you want to add? Okay, Claire, there we go. Hi, Claire. Brody, if you could help Claire unmute.
I got it. Hi. I thought that Allison, who was in our group, made a really good point, which is, and a lot of times when they're building density, it's still not affordable. We're talking $800,000 little tiny homes. And so even when we're talking about, increasing density, that's not necessarily going to solve our problem. And that we have to come at it from a lot of angles to ensure that we have a really diverse housing market.
That is powerful. And we had a lot of bills this cycle. We'll get into our big group conversation. Back up to Group 1. Guillermo or Zarbi or Lalita, you guys want to share anything from Group 1? Zarbi, you are wonderful. I would really love for you to share some of the conversations that we were having in our group if you feel comfortable. Guillermo? He needs to, Freddie, Guillermo needs to be unmuted.
Yes, thank you. So, we have a really good conversation with Sarvi. Sarvi, she's working with a lot of refugees, and her main concern was that, right? How that we can make sure that all these people will get somewhere to live with dignity, right, and respect. Paula shared that there is a lot of money. I don't remember the amount, sounds a lot, but at the end, it's only like $2,000 for family for a year or less. And that is not enough, right? That we need to be thinking about how we can make sure that all these people get a place to live. We're getting them, it's not getting them and put them as a homeless. That's what I was thinking. That doesn't make sense. We're saying we need to bring refugees here. Let's make homes for them. Let's make space for they to live with dignity and not really bad. And I think Sarvi was unmuted. She can probably.
Sarvi, did you want to add anything to that? Thank you. That was powerful. Sarvi?
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. Yes, thank you so much for summarizing that. That's exactly what my concern was. I was just voicing my concerns for the new arrivals, that how are they going to survive when we are all Washingtonians, we are all facing this housing challenge. My heart just breaks for our new arrivals that are coming into this challenge.
and that was really powerful. We put in the chat, there's $340 million in refugee relief that had not gone out. So you can click on that so you can share that with community and the CBOs in your community organizations. Renee from group 2, would you like to share what your group talked about? Thank you, Zarbi.
Hi, yes. My name is Renee and I have been living here in Redmond. I actually fit this whole bracket. We're a Black family. My kids are in special education and we live in low income housing. So we could only make as a household of 4 under $40,000 to get affordable housing. And that was almost 6 years ago. And I really appreciate the fight for affordable housing. But with my lived experience, I brought into this housing trauma, poverty, not a lot of education. And so we live check to check. We're basically one paycheck away from being homeless. And and $1,500 for low income for a 2-bedroom. I don't know how affordable that is, but that is affordable housing here on the east side. And so my main point is that when bringing in trauma, and we have an owner and we have a property manager. And so the owners of the building are a nonprofit, but they hire nonprofit property management companies to come in and run their 16 properties. And so there's a huge division on what that looks like between both, because one entity is a nonprofit, one is for profit. And so they're constantly colliding. And then, so there has been a lot of issues with that. And so it's like slumlord, that's what I compare it to right now. And so, like I was explaining in our group, in my apartment, we had black mold, and I sent over a maintenance request in March of 2020. It took stakeholders and an attorney to get all of the black mold the next year out of my apartment in the next January of 2021. But we have to go through this huge hoop for a simple maintenance request. And that brings upon more trauma, that brings upon illness when you're living in these situations. So there is a price to pay when you're in affordable housing, as you are looked upon as less than. And since you can't afford to pay, so we get our rent supplemented, it's not Section 8 or anything, but our property manager gets supplement from the state of Washington.
And what we're going to talk about, Renee, when we get to the advocacy portion, is there are several different groups out there to make sure that you know where your resources are to advocate and to use your voice, whether it is low income or subsidized or whatever the cause may be. Factoring in and making sure that you, as a leader and a person in your community, the leader in your home, that you know the resources that are available to you, because there's power in your voice, and we want to make sure that you are using your voice to make sure that you and your family can get the resources that you deserve. Elena, group 4, do you want to give us an update on what you all discussed in your group?
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure being here. So we've talked about that in the 60s, it's been way different, the house pricing and everything. And now, for example, Redmond used to be more diverse, but now you may see lots of diversity in Bellevue, but it will be one type, it will be tech, who can actually, afford all of those new housing. So even if you lived here for years and years and your family was here, you can't do much just because of all of these newcomers. It's not that like it's a bad thing. I'm a newcomer, right? But not a whole lot you can do unless you specifically in this tech, field.
So that was our main discussion.
Thank you, Leah, for sharing that. That is powerful. Adam, I hear that you have an update. Can you share with the group representing Africans of the East Side? Allow us to unmute, Rosie.
I did it. Hi, hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here. My name is Adam Diba. I am the founder of Africans on the East Side and also the committee director who does the work. We are here, we advocate for parents when they are getting late on stuff and also help kids who are going to school. If people donate, we buy backpacks, we buy their needs. We were just targeting only the immigrant people because we always call them the unforgotten, and they seem to very on trust because of things that happened to them in the past. But we're passing that whole, and they're asking me for more help, more resources, and we're just continuing to do this work. I have not been in African on the East Side. It's only gonna be 2 years, but 23 years I did Bellevue School District volunteer. And I've worked on many groups, and the little change I see was excited. So anyone who wants to join Africa on the East Side and see what we are doing, we have a website. You can ask Debbie. Debbie can share the information with you. And I want to partner with each and every one of you to work and to make this happen. And housing is one of my biggest passion that I'm looking into Seattle. If we give them a land, we build them row houses, and then they have the care in the middle. I think we'll be really good. So thank you.
Adam, thank you for sharing. And we'll definitely reach out. We may have some additional resources, and that goes for everyone on this call. You can connect with the WBBA through Debbie and her phenomenal organization. Group 5, we don't want to leave without hearing from Kirsten or someone in Group 5. Hi, Kirsten. No, just a little bit, nothing. Well, at least, I mean, you don't have to come off mute because this is a safe space and I want you to be comfortable. Kirsten, is the information you're hearing, is it at least helpful to you? Okay, wonderful, wonderful. So that's a little bit about some of the concerns that we're hearing from community, and they all seem to be the same, right? It is too expensive, whether you are an able person or a handy-capable person or someone that is in a lower socioeconomic level. There are not enough solutions to meet the needs. And so we'll go back to the presentation. We're going to talk about how can we change that. Affordable housing advocacy is about our ability to do what you all are doing for tonight, which is use voice to, move and influence decision makers. Next slide. And so what is advocacy? Advocacy is about making your voice heard. And I'll tell you a super quick story. When I was younger, much, much younger than I am today, I was about 18 or 19 years old. I was a single mother. I was newly divorced, and I was working, going to school, and couldn't afford childcare. And so I would go down every day to the city council in Jacksonville, Florida. I'd have to catch 2 buses with my son in an umbrella stroller, and I would sign in to speak to an all-Republican city council about how unfair it was that I couldn't get this Title 10 voucher because I made too much money because I was working 2 jobs. And my only choice at that time was to quit my jobs and to go on to Section 8. But in Jacksonville, Florida, there was a 10-year waiting list. And so I remember showing up every single day for more than a year when the president of the city council said, we're going to change this ordinance, we're going to change this law, you can get the voucher, stop coming down here. And he said, what are you, some type of a lobbyist? And I didn't even know what a lobbyist was. I was going to community college and I was probably $10 away from qualifying for food stamps. And I said, no, I don't know what that is. He said, well, go become one. And my inside joke is today I've worked for 4 presidents, so I thank that good Republican for his good advice. So that's what advocacy is. It's harnessing your power and realizing you have the power and being able to use your power to move decision makers to act at your behest for a cause. Next slide. So who traditionally participates in advocacy? Older people, people who are white, people who own homes, and men. These are the people that are shaping the policy that impacts the BIPOC community, because we think that we need more resources and more tools. Older people, homeowners who tend to be wealthy, have more equity in their home, white people and men. Doesn't look like a lot of folks on this call tonight. Next slide. So here are some examples of how you can get involved. I always tell people, start where you are using what you have. If you have a computer and an email, you can effectuate public policy. You have advocates who work at the grassroots level, organizations like Debbie's, and you have people like myself that are professional lobbyists. You can testify at public hearings, and we've made it so easy because of Zoom, so you can literally sit in from your computer, look at your local mayor, your local city councilor, that local politician, find the council meeting that pertains to your issue, sign in and testify. Your voice has power. You can write a letter. You can send an email to staff and request a meeting. Senator Cooter, Representative Vandana Slatter, Representative Amy Wallen, all these different folks, your local city council people, your mayor. The people that'll say, not in my backyard, we won't change land use, we won't change zoning. You can meet with those people and tell them how their policies are impacting your family. You can serve on a council or a board or an advisory group. Showing up here to this meeting, and when Debbie gives you all a call to action, you become like a quasi advisory group and you can use your power. You can also litigate, working through organizations like the ACLU, working through OCLA, working through Catholic Charities. There are different ways that you can get involved. Outside advocacy is working with organizations like the Washington Build Back Black Alliance, Eastside for All. We can write op-eds. We've had op-eds to appear about affordable housing in the Seattle Times. You can hold educational events and seminars like the one that we have tonight, where we tell you it was a text message to me that became an email to Senator Cooter that became a bill for rent control this session. I met that constituent at a training. I've never met him in person. Your voice is powerful. You can protest. We've seen that over the past couple of years going on in Seattle, in Tacoma, in Bellevue. People coming together to say we're sick and tired of being sick and tired and we're not going to take it anymore. You can do social media campaigns. We can create different slogans for you, give you hashtags, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok. However you connect to your community, use your social media as your own megaphone and your own platform to amplify your voice. When Eastside for All creates a CTA, a call to action, and they send it to you, and they say, hey, you know, Maria or Christina or Kirsten or Maureen, send this email to 10 of your friends, who then sends it to 10 of their friends. Now you've built an army that is amplifying this message. You can build a coalition, which is what the Build Back Black Alliance is. We are an alliance that houses 18 organizations, but when we show up to testify on a bill, those 18 organizations represent 240 Black and Brown CBOs and 500 BIPOC small businesses. You can research and share. When Zarbi asked the question about how do we get refugee aid, and we'll make sure that Adam gets the information as well, $340 million has not been allocated. It is going out to CBOs. Organizations like Debbie and some of the CTOs that you guys work with need to make sure that they are staying in contact with myself and Christina so we can make sure that you are getting those funds for refugees in your community. Next slide. Who shapes and decides the housing policies? Well, I can tell you, Christina and I think Cliff, if he's still on here, when we were doing 1782 missing middle housing, most of the mayors showed up to testify against that, to say not in our backyard, planning about density. Same thing with ADU. So there are councils, there are mayors, there are city departments, boards and commissions, your Bellevue City Council, but also they are organized associations like WONFA. They are organizations that represent these large housing complexes. Sometimes they represent landlords. I work for and represent organizations that represent tenants. I sit on the board of the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance. And so these are people that are shaping policy, that are negotiating policy, that you need to work with Eastside for All, because Debbie can contact those organizations and say, what are some of the housing policies you're working on? And we want to make sure that Bellevue is being included. Can you help us set up and facilitate those meetings for people in community? Our answer will be yes. Next slide. How do you build an advocacy strategy? I always say we start with the simplest premise, empathy. Put yourself in the place of every other person on this call and what you've heard tonight, and then ask yourself one question. What is the problem I'm trying to solve? Is it making sure that people that are vulnerable in community, that have abilities, and some who are not as able, have the same resources as the person that's working at Microsoft? Is it making sure that families won't be gentrified, and the mother who is celebrating in high school graduation in June won't be crying in 4 years when her child has to take a child out of state, a job out of state, because they can't afford to live here? Or they've liquidated the equity in their home to pay for college, and now they are displaced. Identify your target audience. Who am I talking to? Who am I trying to connect with? Do I need to start with my local city council, who might be invested in keeping everything the same? And do I need to look at, do I have the right people and council serving me? Once you define the problem you're trying to solve and you identify the target audience, then we've got to craft that message that is specific to that audience. We never send out anything that is canned. We don't send out emails that look the same to everyone. We want it to be personal. When I'm talking to Senator Patty Kuderer, I know that she's a lawyer. I know that she cares deeply about some of the other issues. I make that issue specific to her. You create an outreach strategy, which means working with community, working with community, working with community. And then like Nike, you just do it. You set some KPIs and some goals. You want to monitor that and you want to evaluate their success, because if something didn't work, don't keep doing it. Let's do something different. Next slide. So how do you message? Value, problem, solution, action. Value. What is the problem we're trying to solve? What value is that going to bring to the community? What do I need that solution? Solutions should be grassroots driven. That means coming from community, not driven by organizations. You use your voice. And then community, through those conversations and those explorative talks that we're having here tonight, you determine the action. Well, what are we going to do about it? Housing's too damn unaffordable. It's a problem. We're not getting enough solutions. So what is the action? What are we going to do about it? Next slide. Questions? Let's open it up. What are we going to do about it? And there's no such thing as a wrong answer. You can raise your hand or wave at the camera and Brady will unmute you. But I don't want us to leave here tonight. We have 11 minutes before we end, Claire. And we want to have a call to action. Claire, what are we going to do about it?
Hi there. I really just want to emphasize to people that running for a city commission position or becoming part of city boards is actually a lot easier than people think it is. You get a very fancy title, get to be called something like the planning commissioner. I literally just sat down and they were like, congratulations, city commissioner. I have no background in zone. I'm the planning commissioner for Bothell. I have two friends who become homeless recently, and it was a 10-minute interview. And now I help devise the plans for city council to vote on. So I really, if you can, I know it's a privilege for me to have like childcare and time, but if you can, it's not as intimidating as it sounds to put your voice out there and because leaders want to know.
And this is a safe space so you can share. Claire, thank you for sharing. That was both bold and powerful. What Claire is basically saying is, if we don't like the way things are going, maybe you are the we that you have been waiting for. How are you going to change it? Oh, I see Chris and Sarah. Okay, we'll start with Sarah. Sarah, and then Chris, you're next.
Mine will be really quick. And I just want to, I do a lot of community organizing to try to bring positive voices to issues so that our councils and our leaders are hearing from the people who want something to happen, because really what almost always happens is all the energy is coming from those who don't want things to happen. They want to stop things. They're afraid of change, or they don't want change, or they don't like, they're afraid of what's coming, or they just don't like something. And so, there's just so much energy in that negative space. And if we're really going to transform our community into a place where there's housing for all and there's a place for all, we have to bring those positive voices to the table and to our elected officials, to our wonderful city council member, Janice, who I love and who totally gets this, so that they hear that there are folks out in the community that support this, because it's just easier to hide when you're getting yelled at all the time and just not do anything. So thank you for letting me speak.
And what Sarah's saying, to summarize that, is no one can be an army of one. Janice has to know we have her back. You got to show up. Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Claire and Sarah. That was really great. And yeah, I'm first with this question. I was originally thinking back to something that we talked about in the last breakout room, and it was gonna be kind of negative, admittedly, but I think as I've been listening to people talk, this way I can add a positive to it at the end. So I'll start with the negative and then with the positive. In our recent breakout room, one of the things I mentioned to the group was kind of my disappointment at the lack of passage of some of the bills that you mentioned, 1782, 1660 this year. Because it really seemed like it was state level widespread action that would be able to make such a big difference in so many communities at once, versus having to rely on local action and having to go to different council meetings, following different planning commission meetings, and just having to do all this overlapping work for each little different jurisdiction. And talking about the urgency that's been mentioned a lot tonight, that doing a wider approach was something that just seemed really important to me. So I that was what I was originally going to talk about, that disappointment of when wider approaches don't come to fruition. But the positive, I think to like the Health Through Housing initiative, and at the county level, how the county has created this program that really has been responding with urgency, and has very much been strong enough to be able to push back against the naysaying voices, because it's a proposal that's really starting from this values-driven place of, like, we know it's a problem and we need to respond with urgency, and so this is what we're doing. And instead of having to fight for actions in each of these little cities, having that widespread action is really helpful. So responding at a big scale, I think, is something important to keep in mind too, when you can, of course.
And Chris, that is dead on, and I think it's going to be powerful, because Janice will probably be our last to make sure that we have community involved. But I'll just say this for everyone in this group. Through today, 21 people have announced that they are not running for re-election at the Washington State Legislature. This is an election cycle. It's going to be a tough cycle. We expect on the federal level to probably use the House and the Senate. Not an excuse, but we knew going into it that 1904, 1660, and 1782 were going to be a tough haul. I worked for 7 years to get foreclosure fairness. A lot of those politicians were afraid of losing their seat because of what we did the year before. And Chris, you can get my information from Debbie. I'm happy to, Christine and I, to give you a policy briefing, or anyone in community. We talk to community on that, but that's what 21 people have announced they are not running for re-election. And some of that means entire districts will turn over. Janice, you get to give us the last word for community on here before Debbie and I close it out, because you are an example of local.
Yes.
What we can do to help you. Help us.
Yeah, so in terms of actions, Debbie, I texted you a photo that if you could share in the chat. What I just said to Debbie is, this is a work plan for the city of Bellevue for for our development services and our code group. And what you'll see is that there is a lot of work that we are doing where your voice is going to be essential around affordable housing, because this is the time where we are starting our comprehensive plan, which is updated every 8 years. So that decides what kind of land use, right, housing, transportation. And so it's a really important place for you to have a voice. You'll also see that we're going to be looking at the Wilburton and the Bel-Red area and looking at our comprehensive plan in those two areas as well. And then the way you translate the little table here is the one that's called AHS. That is our affordable housing strategy. So what you'll see is that the next right work includes our starting to look at the accessible dwelling units, the ADU legislation policy is embedded within that next right work. The one below that on affordable housing strategy C1, that is the place where for the faith and religious owned property as well as city owned property, how we might look at increasing density and heights in those properties for what we were calling a super bonus. And that is another place where I think having your voices will be super important to make sure that when we look at our land use code, we are really centering on how do we build to scale the affordable housing that's needed to support our community. So I just thought it was important for you to see that, because this is work that we are either just starting or continuing on, where your voice will make a huge amount of difference.
Janice, thank you for your service to community, and thank you so much. I'm Paula Sardinas. Debbie, I want to thank you and Eastside for All for allowing us to host and to moderate tonight. Thank you for community for sharing this safe and sacred space. It will not be our last time talking to you. And with that, we hand it back over to your Executive Director and Founder, Debbie Lacey.
Paula, thank you. Can we all give Paula, we can do the Delbert Richardson hand rub here, sharing our love and appreciation. Got that. Thank you, Delbert. Got that from him years ago. So appreciate you and the Build Back Black Alliance. I'll get used to saying that soon. It's a tongue twister. But you all now know, if you didn't already know, what a phenomenal force Paula is and her team. I want to thank all of them for co-creating and sharing with us and bringing their leadership to our work in East King County, lifting us all up. We have a quick poll for you, and there's been some great posts in the chat too, if you want to direct your attention there for follow-ups. But we really would welcome your feedback on just these two quick questions. Brady, did I open those up correctly? Do you all see the poll?
I see the poll, yes.
Okay, cool. So yeah, if you could do that. And then, like I said in the chat, we've got our call to action housing justice email list. We want to encourage all of you to put, I know we've got Lalita Opala here from the Indian American Community Services. You already met Adam Deba from Africans on the East Side. We've got some other supporters here, Zarbi from Immigrant Women's Community Center. So lots of great resources and supporters here. If you want to share your websites, your contact information, we are about connection. We have to stay together, as they say, stay together. We won't always be united 100% because we have different communities and different community needs. But I know that there's a great deal of overlap and things that we all share in common, that we can lift our voices in partnership with one another. And the more we're able to connect and say, hello, neighbor, welcome, and how can we work together, the stronger and easier that work will be. So thank you all so much. I again want to thank FutureWise for being our partner as well in this work and all their leadership. And there's just so much more to come. We're very happy that you're here today for this important conversation at such a incredible in all ways time in our world and lives. And thank you for taking the time out of your day to be here with us. And we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you all so much. Have a good evening.